I brought my comfort balloon. It's cheaper than a dog. You will have a comfort balloon by the end of lunch, just so you know. So when I got a call from the folks at CADRE back in, I think, February to ask if I would come and speak, what they said is that over the years you have invited a lot of the icons from the field of dispute resolution. To which I replied, you must have gotten to the bottom of the list and run out of icons, and so now you're calling me? Is that what this is about? This is sort of a how-to for how to become a half-hearted fanatic. It's the other half of what he was talking about this morning. So we'll play with that a little bit. So I'm going to focus on playfulness and play this afternoon. And I come to this from the way that I kind of think about conflict in healthcare. And I came to the conflict work from nursing. So I'm a nurse and been a nurse for over 30 years, worked as an ICU nurse, trauma nurse for a long time. And my interest in dispute resolution really came out of trying to figure out how to make the healthcare systems work better. As a young person, I thought that health policy was what would help us improve our healthcare systems. I think there's a role for that, but what I realized over time is it's really the relationships that enable us to provide safe and high quality care and do a good job in that space. So I became interested in conflict as a sort of an outcropping from that. And the idea of thinking about conflict from a relational space, from looking at it not as interest-based or rights-based, those things that we spend a lot of time chattering about, but moving into that relational space. And in healthcare, that makes a lot of sense, and I think it does for the areas that you work in as well, in that if I'm thinking about something from an interest-based perspective, it's still me versus you. It's what I want and need versus what you want and need, and how we can sort of negotiate some kind of resolution to that. But really, as I think about where conflict comes from, it's an emergent quality of all relationships. It's just a piece of being in relation to others in our space, in our room. And so to be in relation to others in the presence of conflict and appreciate that it's the relationship we have to work on means then I have to think about, well, how do I engage with other people when there's conflict in the space between us? And how do we maintain a connection when the last thing I want to do is be connected to this person who is jumping on my last nerve and bothering me? You know, I really just kind of want to vote them off the island, right? I just want to find a way to get rid of them and run screaming from the room. And so the task is, how do we stay connected? How do we stay connected with those folks whom we most want to disconnect from? And the things that we think about as sort of conflict behaviors, those bad behaviors of shaming and blaming and accusing and all the stuff that we get into, that's really just self-protection. That's really just our way of protecting ourselves, distancing and disconnecting. So what would it look like to stay connected, and how do we grow that skill set? How do we get better at that? And so that kind of led me into thinking about how to train my staff that I had at the hospital when I was working as a nursing director, because they were grumpy with each other and weren't getting along. And as a consequence, we were harming patients. So we had a compelling interest to actually talk to each other and get along well. It was essentially so people wouldn't die. And you know, that sounds kind of bizarre, but you know, all the evidence said if we don't talk to each other, people die. Do we want to do something about that? And the answer is yes, but how? How became the question. So at that time, when I was working at UCLA, in the evening, just for my own fun, I was doing improv comedy at night. And it occurred to me that the improv exercises I was learning to be able to engage with my partners on stage without a script, to be able to respond in the moment, to listen carefully, and to be able to work together as a team toward an unexpected outcome was exactly what we were doing in healthcare, right? We have no idea where we're headed together, but we need to go together, and we need to be able to accept and honor what everyone is offering to figure that out. So I used those improv exercises as a way of training my staff And then that sort of snowballed to working with the entire medical center, teaching those communication and connection skills in a way that was really playful and fun. So I would do all of my staff retreats at the comedy club during the day because there's nobody there. Comedians are, hungover and sleeping during the day. And so I'm like, great, this is a free space for us. So I would bring my staff over to the black box from the ICU to a space with no stimulation other than what they create for themselves. And we would learn our skill sets there and then take them back and practice them. So that's a long way of saying I think play is important. I think playfulness is important, and I'm going to kind of walk through why I think that's sort of rising in importance for me in the area of conflict work. So, as any good scholar and academic, I spend half my time at UC Hastings teaching in the Center for Dispute Resolution there. I did a little research, and I read lots of articles and lots of things with citations and cross-indexed and blah, blah, blah. About the difference between play and playfulness and creativity and innovation. And then I saw this and I thought, well, this pretty much sums it up. So I like this. Playfulness is a way of being, and play is a way of being with. Play is a way of being with. So if playfulness is a mindset, it's a way of being in the world. It's that flexible, open mindset of, I wonder what's possible, that I can carry into any circumstance. I can be playful without doing anything. I can sit quietly in a meeting and playfully make up stories about the other people at the table. Not that I would, but I might. Play is more of the activity, right? It's more the activity of being with. And I can apply that in lots of different ways. So if I'm an artist, I might play with color and sound. If I'm an engineer, I might play with materials and chemicals. If I am a teacher, I might play with different modalities of learning. So we can play with ideas, we can play with concepts. And the idea is that I'm with something else. So I'm with the idea, I am with the other people. There's a connector there of being with other. So play is an activity that in and of itself is satisfying. We play because we like to play. And all animals play, all people play, and that there's a spontaneity to it. There's also a voluntariness to it. You can decide to play and you can decide to quit playing. I'm done now, I'm taking my ball and I'm going home. I'm done. We can choose to be engaged in play or not. So I'm going to invite all of you to just play for a little bit. And we're going to start with playing with yourself. And I've got to find a better way to say that. You will be playing with your neighbors by the end, so it's going to get... So, just think about twiddling your thumbs. So, just putting your hands together and twiddling your thumbs. And just practicing that and thinking about different ways to twiddle. There's no real rules. So just practicing loosening up your thumbs. And as you develop the core competency for twiddling, you might be able to take the twiddling act on the road. So you can try this now at your tables. So crossing your arms, find a partner or two next to you, and cross your arms and hold hands with them. And just practice twiddling thumbs with both of your partners. And make up some new rules to that twiddling. So when we're doing relational work, one of the things we want to do is listen to the relational space. It's the space between us. It's the space in the air, right? So what did you just notice as we started to play in this room? What were some things that you noticed shifted? What shifted?
Noise level.
The noise level went up. What else? There was laughter happening. There was some giggling and laughing. Yeah. Yeah, there was movement, right? we became alive. We became alive in the space. And so the idea that play can introduce a sense of presence and aliveness, and we can shift the relational space by inviting play in a way that feels safe and not threatening and gives people the option to opt out as well. So as a nurse, I'm always kind of assessing, well-being in groups. And what we find from the research is play is an indicator of well-being for adults and for kids. And that usually it's the first activity that will disappear for children if they don't have a good sense of well-being. If something is missing, that is sort of one of the basic human needs, if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for any of us, we will stop playing if we don't have our basic needs met. And that's an indicator for me of whether there's a sense of well-being. When I go, I often do mediations with physician practice groups and other grumpy people. And I always ask them, what are your indicators of success? And, it's so interesting what they'll say is like, I just want to be happy when I leave at the end of the day. Like, oh, well, that's good. How will we measure that? How will we know we've moved closer? And what I found now works is, that pain scale card that they give you it says, the happy face on one end and the crying face at the other. So we use the pain scale of where are we at the end of the meeting? How do we move up a little bit or down a little bit? But I'm looking for indicators of well-being, because that's really what we're saying is I'm not in a place of well-being when I'm in conflict with other people. I also will use, the thing we use for 2-year-olds of HALT, H-A-L-T, to evaluate what's causing their meltdown. Are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you tired? And sometimes I'll have to assess that with the group and go accordingly. When I was working with the first nursing unit that I was in charge of that had some really awful things happening before I got there, I knew that we had crossed over and success was imminent because I could hear them laughing outside my door. I could hear laughter out in the hallway, and I thought, okay, we're there. We've made it. We're there. There's a sign of well-being amongst them. They now trust each other enough to laugh together. So all of nature plays, and we are playful by nature. My friend Bernie DeKoven, all of nature plays, and we are playful by nature. Birds play, all social animals play, ants play, bees play. It's crazy. Birds like figuring out games with tools to play with, the environment. So if that's true, then if we're not playful, we have chosen not to be playful, or there's something missing in our capacity to care for ourselves. Our resilience is down, and therefore we can't put energy into play. So the concept of playfulness as an attitude or a mood, that space of being flexible and adaptive and open to possibility, it's the opposite of where I am when I'm grumpy, right? When I become inflexible and I start to create barriers around myself. So the idea of moving into intentionally just a playful mindset. How do I invite myself into that playful mindset when I'm noticing that I'm not there? What would it take for me to step over, just get a little closer to that mindset? And noticing what gets in my way. So just with the person next to you, think of one thing that gets in your way that might interrupt you being in a playful space. And it could be something you hear in your head, a voice that's telling you something. It could be, something physical, situational. One thing that gets in your way that keeps you from being playful. As you think of your one thing, maybe even imagine giving it a name. Something that you could refer back to at the time that it shows up. Mr. Grumpy, or Felicia Fatigue, or, Katie Chaos. Like, just think of giving it a name so that it becomes a familiar friend that you can play with when it shows up, and you can have a chat with that little familiar friend to see if you can invite it to go away. There are different aspects of playfulness, and sometimes playful becomes, we get worried about being playful because we think, oh, but the things we're dealing with are so serious that how dare I mock the severity or seriousness of what we're dealing with here by being too lighthearted. And I think there's a difference between taking something seriously and intentionally engaging and being lighthearted with that and honoring the complexity of what it is that we're dealing with. There's an absurdity to the complexity of the things we're trying to fix. It's impossible to fix the things we're trying to fix. If we look at other human beings as problems that need to be fixed, we just don't get anywhere. There's an absurdity to that, right? And that's actually kind of funny. But, look, you know what? I've got some solutions for you. I'm here to fix you today. Would you like my list? Or just the top two? Because I'm kind of busy. That there's an absurdity to the complexity. If you think about all the actors that have to have input into being able to care for these children and educate them and move them out into being successful adults, it's an impossible task. So how do we maintain our own sense of resilience, our own ability to engage in that complexity with the humility of what we're facing and also the full humanity of what we have at our disposal? The full human experience of this is just batshit crazy what we're trying to do. And we're all arguing over how to do it. Let's just start with, it's impossible to begin with. Let's see how far we can get. Let's see how far we can get and maybe have some fun along the way, really nurturing and taking care of each other to get there. So one of the researchers that I read came up with this model of playfulness. And what I like to do is just pick one of these and say, what's one thing I could work on? What would help me? Do I want to work on being more open-minded? Do I want to notice and nurture that? Do I want to work on being a little bit more flexible or imaginative or lighthearted? And just picking one and carrying it forward with you today and throughout the week and seeing, does playfulness start to show up a little bit more if we just sort of hone in on one, notice and nurture. If we look at folks for whom wisdom is their work, our wisdom workers, they're always funny. They always have a lightness to them. And it comes back to that thing of, it's not that they aren't doing serious work. They're probably doing the most serious work of all. And yet there's a lightness to them that comes from having been tested in the fire, from looking at what matters and what's important, right? And so I think this is such a great reminder of just looking at the beauty of that laughter and also the importance and seriousness of the work and putting those side by side with each other. Sometimes we say, that person's just not playful. They're just not very playful. They're just a little too serious. And I wonder sometimes if it's actually they're not playful, since we're all playful, it's probably just latent playfulness. And so I always try to do tests. I always try to do tests to see how far I can push somebody to just see, is there a little playfulness in there? This doesn't always go well for me, I will say. You tend to be authority figures for, my therapist can work that out with me, but I always want to do a little test to just test my assumption and see. One of the doctors that I was trying to do a mediation with, he the first time I talked with him, he said, I'm not interested in mediating, there's no need for a mediation, I'm not participating. This was by phone. And so I said, well, I'm going to be flying out next week, and so I'd love to meet with you, love to set up some time on your calendar with your secretary. Blah, blah, blah. No, I'm not meeting, I'm too busy. So I called his secretary and set up some time with him on the calendar for the two of us to meet. And during the day, he must have seen the appointment, and so he essentially said, I'm not coming to the meeting today. I've got company from out of town, and I've got to go. And so so I didn't call back to get the message. I was busy. And so he showed up at the room and just put his head in the door and said, I told you I'm not mediating, I'm not being part of this, I'm not coming. And so I said, well, is there anything that you want me to know about before you leave? Because I know you have people from out of town. So for 2 hours, he was in that doorway, standing there. And I would get up and I would bring him coffee, I'd go sit back down. And so essentially, you know, I get a lot of information from him, but we're not really having conversation because the other guy's sitting in the room, you know, not able to talk with him. And I said, well, by the way, you know, because I know you need to go. I do have one-to-one time with you scheduled for tomorrow morning at 7. And he gets really mad, like, don't you take no for an answer? Nope. So I leave feeling pretty disgruntled, like there's no way that this is going to work. I can't get him in the room with the other person. He's not going to talk with me. But I'll come tomorrow morning. So I'm standing at the elevator at the hospital, and it's 6:45, and my phone rings, and it's him. And he gruffly says to me, what kind of coffee do you like? I'm at the Starbucks. Like, yes. And so, you know, that idea of staying in a light space with it, you know, figuring out that obviously there's something that needs to be worked on here that's bothering all of these folks, and being tenacious enough but not taking yourself so seriously that you fall back into starting to judge who's right and who's wrong and staying out of that lighthearted, playful space. And I am still in contact with him, actually. So we're going to shift now that you have full bellies, and I don't want you to fall asleep for the very end of this. So we're going to shift to a little bit of interactivity. And I want to show you a very short clip of film. And these are videos that a documentarian who has traveled around the world took of kids' street games, kids playing, you know, just spontaneous street games. And I picked a handful of clapping games for us to watch, and just kind of see what you notice as these kids play.
Makes my heart beat 246. Not because it's dirty, not because it's clean, not because you're kissing boys and handmade things. Girls, have a lot of fun. Here comes Nancy with the blue shoes on. She can do the little ball, she can do the splits, but I pick your five, but she's a big hit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You did it because it's dirty, not because it's clean, not because you're kissing boys and handmade things. Girls, have a lot of fun. Here comes Georgia with her blue jeans on. She can do the wibble wobble, she can do the splits, but I bet you five bucks she can't do this. Close your eyes and count to 10. If she touches her up, she's a big fat hen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. She didn't make it up, so that's the end.
That was great. All right, so why should kids have all the fun, eh? Yeah. So I'm going to invite you to stand up, push in all of the things, because safety first, really. Safety first. And form a pod of 4 or 5 people. Form a pod of 4 or 5 people. here's what we're going to do. So I want you, in your pod, to create a clapping game that no one's ever seen before. A clapping game that no one's ever seen before, that the 4 or 5 of you, this will be your private secret game. Okay? Clapping game that no one's ever seen before. And introduce yourselves to your playmates if you don't know each other. Start with that, too. So here's what you've just achieved based on research and people smarter than me. Here's what they say you have just contributed to for yourself. That you are better at observations. You're more engaged with your environment as playful people. You're better able to see things from a different perspective. You're better at finding solutions to complex problems, and you have a higher level of flexibility, mental flexibility, adaptiveness. If you're in school, you're going to get better grades now just because of that game. And the more you play, well, that's probably going too far with the conclusion. You're perceived as more attractive, and I got to say, you know, from where we started to now, wow, what a difference. You're able to turn boring tasks into something more fun, and you're able to reduce your stress levels in your lives. You've added to your own resilience. You will live longer, and you look better doing it just because of lunch today. Just because of lunch. So I want to dip into the resilience piece, and this is really where I feel like this work is meaningful for me at this point. That we know that people who are in high stress environments and who isn't, right? That in those high stress environments we lose our resilience. We lose our ability to have flexible cognition. Our cognitive appraisal, which is our ability to look at the problem and define what it is or how severe it is, and our secondary cognitive appraisal, our ability to look at that problem and say, do I have enough resources to manage it or not? That becomes altered when we're under stress. So just imagine all the conversations that you have where the cognitive appraisal is out of whack because of the stress level. And it's not just the stress of taking care of the kiddos, right? It's all the other things that come into the room with us. And that seems to be escalating by the day. So the idea that we're bringing all of that into the space and then losing sort of our cognitive function and getting into that fear space, which is more protective, less connective, that we lose that sense of adaptiveness and we lose our resilience because of that. The data is awful. It's just awful. I started doing this bit of research and I had to stop because it was stressing me out. Just looking at the ways in which we are not taking care of ourselves, we are numbing the stress. We are numbing the stress to the point of self-destruction. We are killing ourselves. We've gotten to a place where we have confused, I think, the idea of endurance and resilience. They're different. We live from a place of endurance, and we have these little seductive promises we make to ourselves of, when this project is over, when this piece is done, I will rest. When we get done with this thing, we'll be back to a normal level of workflow. So we make these future promises to ourselves that never get fulfilled. And then we live with the shame of not being able to keep up, to work harder, to do more. And shame is an isolating emotion. It's not something we share with other people. So we all run around with sort of this myth of perfection, or this myth of continued endurance, that I'll be able to do this forever at this level, and never resting. Never taking the push and the rest equally as important. All of the coaching and things that I do now, especially with executives and people that are in very high stress positions, I start with resilience. Like, you're so far below level of baseline, there's no way you can take on the goals you're hoping to achieve, let alone deal with this stuff out here. We're just going to start with getting you up to baseline. Let's get you back up there, and what that might take. You're so depleted. You're not sleeping. You may be actually using some of the medications and things here that's making it worse. And so I almost start out as a nurse doing some health coaching before we even get to the other coaching that we're working on. The saddest part for me is it's our kids too. And why wouldn't it be? You know, they absorb all the energy that's in the space around them. And so we're starting to see things that are just profoundly disturbing. When we look at this first one, the American Psychological Association does the stress survey every year, Stress in America. And of course it had escalated quite a bit for adults and children. One of the things that I thought was difficult in this first one is that of the kids reporting the headaches and having sleep difficulties, their parents really, really underestimated. They barely thought it was happening for the kids at all. And who knows how much it's happening for the parents too. So there's even a disconnect in appreciating how stressed the other people are around us, or the kiddos. So the idea that playfulness and being able to get back to a place of gifting ourselves with play, giving ourselves permission to play, and in whatever form that looks like for each of you, and to rest and to rejuvenate, enables us to do all the other work that we want to do. That's what enables us to be these half-hearted fanatics that Howard talked about this morning. The other half of our time has to be about taking care of ourselves. If we come back to the premise of what we do is relational work, the common denominator in all my relationships is me. It's really the only part of the relationship dynamic I have any control over. And if I'm showing up in those relationships with my instrument not tuned, you know, of course we can't play together. I've got to be able to take care of myself and notice when my resilience is low and get out of that endurance cycle. And recognize when, you know, when that seductive voice is, you know, Debra, that would be a really cool project. You'd only have to fly to another country. You know that voice, right? You know what it looks like. So the idea that we want to move more toward active coping strategies, and the research says the more playful we are, the more we can access those active coping strategies. That we are able to find them and use them versus reaching for the dysfunctional coping behaviors, as we would say in nursing. A lot of times what we call conflict is dysfunctional coping. It's people not being able to cope with the situation that they're in anymore. And what if we engaged in this from a place of, how can I create a holding space for you so that your resilience is high enough for you to deal with what you've got on your plate? Can I create that holding space? And that holding space can just be a conversation. It can just be a hug. It can just be a large amount of chocolate, personally speaking. So I'm going to leave you with the idea of having your own comfort balloon. You'll see that there's balloons on the table. And one of the things that we know also from research is that gratitude is a way of replenishing our resilience. That gratitude can undo some of the cognitive neurology that is around blame and shame and beating up on ourselves, the impact, the long-term chronic impact of chronic endurance. Gratitude can be a way of countering that. So I want you to find a balloon on the table. and blow up your balloon, your comfort balloon, and then hold it gently as if you love it. If you need help tying the knot, ask one of your new friends at the table. It's always the hardest part. Some people have this competency and others don't. Here's what I would like for you to do. Yes, your balloon, there's not a regulation size. We're not about, this is not a compliance exercise. I want you to quietly, with your balloon, quietly think about for a moment something you're deeply grateful for. Something you're deeply grateful for. What do you have gratitude for in this moment? And imagine that, seeing that on the balloon. Now I want you to get up and exchange gratitude with each other. So as you hand your balloon to the other person, share with them what you're grateful for, and have them share their balloon with you, what they're grateful for. I'm going to end here only because we're out of time. And I think a great way to end would be to just kind of toss your balloons in the air and thank your friends at the tables with you. And thanks to all of you for playing with me today.